Sapphic love in the Tanakh. That was supposed to be an exciting, attract your attention. All right, so this morning, while I was reading through some of the terrible news, a fortuitous moment happened for me because I found an article about poetry. And I want to share that. Please don't get scared and leave the room when you hear the word poetry. Poetry is certainly not a subject that I have a great deal of facility with, and not one in which I excel. But this article makes it more approachable, and I hope, as we study the Bible's greatest love poem, that you will appreciate the messages that it offers. And for just a couple of moments, I hope that this class with me will help you escape the ugliness out there and will bring you to another world and time. So here's the article says, importantly, a great poem makes me want to get out of my chair and pace around the room, makes me want to throw my hands up and show it to somebody or say out loud or shout from the rooftops when I have it. And I'm trying to move this so that okay, when I have it. And it's the only thing that matters. And this is very clever, I think. You should be able to see, this is the article. So if you want to copy the link, you should do that. Okay, back to the, okay, so, we probably are all familiar, hold on, sorry. We probably are all familiar. There we go. There we go. We're probably all familiar with this beautiful verse that is often recited by a bride at a wedding ceremony. It's an avowal of love and summarizes the depth of relationship between the bride and the groom. But we may not know the source. Shir HaShirim, also known as Song of Songs or Song of Solomon, or in the Christian Bible, Canticle or Canticle of Canticles, is the poem from which this verse is taken. And we're going to find out a little bit later that this verse is rewritten in a somewhat more explicit fashion, but we'll save the best for last. Okay, today's lesson plan. We're going to do some general background on the poetry, on Shir HaShirim. We'll look at the text itself. We'll look at sexual language in the Hebrew Bible in a more general way. And then we're going to examine two questions. Why is this text included in the Tanakh? And why do we read this on Passover? Okay, Shir HaShirim is one of the 5 Megillot in the Ketuvim writings section of the Tanakh. Now, my husband asked me, why is the KH in red? The KH is in red because Tanakh is Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. So the writing sections, that's why it's called the Tanakh. And it is the entire Hebrew Bible. The Torah is the 5 books of Moses. The Tanakh includes the Torah and the prophetic works and the writings, which include Psalms and Proverbs and 5 Megillot and other books. Each of the 5 Megillot is read on a different holiday, and Shir HaShirim is read on Pesach. And we'll discuss that a little bit later. As I said, there are other names for the book. In the Christian Bible, it's called Canticle or Canticles. And this repetition of the word, like Song of Songs, is really as a consequence of a Hebrew language convention, which when you say Song of Songs, it means essentially that it's the superlative song, the best song in this category of songs. And those of you who are familiar will understand that it's similar to the Kadosh Kadoshim, which was the inner court, the inner sanctum of the temple, where only the high priest would enter. So the Kadosh Kadoshim is the holiest of holies. The content of the book, it consists of a series of love poems in which two lovers describe themselves and each other in vivid terms, their longings and desires, and a vision of and amongst other things, a vision of a royal wedding. Just to be clear, it is not clear whether, nobody really knows whether the book is an anthology of poems or whether it was all written at one time. But I think most scholars would say that it's probably an anthology. And some people argue that it may have been written as a wedding song, or even that it may have been written as a song for the taverns. Okay, why was it written? When was it written? There is nothing in the text to tell us when the composition date. There are no historical personalities or events like we have for the Book of Esther, or some other books, or even the prophetic books where we're talking about pre-Babylonian exile and post-Babylonian exile. But what the poem does is it seems to have some parallels with Egyptian and Mesopotamian love poetry. And modern scholars, for whatever it's worth, suggest that it was composed or edited in the 4th or 3rd century BCE. The authorship. The first line of Song of Songs says, Shir Hashirim Asher Lishlomo, the Song of Songs by Solomon. So, did Solomon really write Shir Hashirim? Well, that's really unlikely. Then why is the book attributed to him? There are other books in the Bible that are attributed to him, in the Tanakh that are attributed to him, and those include the book of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, both of which fall into the category of wisdom books. And of course, the Bible tells us that Solomon was wise. What you may not also know is that according to biblical tradition, Solomon was an expert in flora and fauna, and a lover of many women. So when a book has a certain theme, it is sometimes attributed to a certain author. Some might argue that the poet includes Solomon as the author so that it would legitimize, or it may have been added later, so that it would legitimize the inclusion of this book in the canon, in the biblical canon. Another example of attributing authorship is the Psalms of David. It's probably highly unlikely that David wrote all of the Psalms, if he wrote any, but this attribution is a convention in biblical works. Okay, now, here's the challenge. We're going to look at the themes in the poem, and I am going to put up a quote. I would love for you to be able to join with me in reciting some of this poetry and see what it does for you. So Eden, this is where I'm wondering, I would be happy to call on people, or since I cannot find my list again, perhaps Eden can, if you raise your hand and you want to be called on, Eden can arrange for you to read the verse. But it's going to take us a little bit of time. It might be a little awkward, but I think it's important in the context of this crazy day and in the context of trying to move ourselves out of our lives right now, to actually read it and to have as many of you as wish, read it for yourselves. So how does everybody feel about that? Just nod your head. Eden's really got to be in charge of this part. Okay?
Okay, Eden.
Yes. Sounds good, Eden. Okay.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Okay, great.
Yep, sounds good.
All right.
Yeah.
Since I can see Ellen Doft, I'm going to give you the privilege of the first one. One of the themes the titillating language of and the metaphors in the poetry of Shir HaShidrim is drawn from many different spheres, including pastoral sphere and the natural sphere. And as we'll see, even the geographical references. Here are a couple of my favorites from the pastoral sphere. Ellen, go for it.
Your teeth are like a flock of ewes climbing up from the washing pool. All of them bear twins, and not one loses her young.
So it seems a little odd, but when you think about it, when you think about these ewes and these white ewes coming up and when you think about the ancient times when probably people had lost their teeth at some point in time, it's a statement of perfection. It's a statement of beauty, and it's potentially, if you're into pastoral, it's a lovely way to think about somebody's physical being. Okay, let me call on somebody else. Rabbi Perlman?
Sure.
How about this one?
The second one. Your navel is like a round goblet. Let mixed wine not be lacking. Your belly like a heap of wheat hedged about with lilacs. Your breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle.
Now, I don't know how you would feel, ladies, if your husband came home and said these things to you, but certainly it's supposed to be evocative. On a very personal note, my parents were married right around Pesach, and apparently the story is that my father, who must have been a randy sort, read this poem to my mother after they were married. So,
Wow.
I don't know. I always knew he was, he liked the concept of love, but man, oh man. Anyway, other themes in the poem are the land of Israel and royalty. My sister-in-law, Susie, would you like to read the next one?
Sure.
I can't get my picture.
You are beautiful, my darling, as Tirzah, comely as Jerusalem, awesome as bannered host.
Okay. So Tirzah was the capital of the northern kingdom, and it was supposedly beautiful. Jerusalem is the city of cities, and this is actually a description of the woman. So it's interesting how the woman is described in fairly strong terms, awesome as a bannered host. What I wanted to mention before, and I kind of missed, is that in ancient Arabic and Egyptian poetry, each part of the body is compared to a different object with which they share a trait. So, for instance, in the last group of quotes, heap of wheat may refer to the shape and color of her belly or to its fertility. Okay. Irene, how about this one?
Your neck is like the Tower of David, built to hold weapons, hung with 1,000 shields, all the quivers of warriors.
Now, this was also written about the woman in the poem. It's a description of the woman in the poem. And it's particularly notable for the power which it implies that the woman represented, the power of her love, of her beauty for the man. And again, it shows the importance of David and Jerusalem. Israel and royalty were very important in Jewish poetry. So this is not unusual for Jewish poetry. It's not unusual for the Psalms.
Excuse me, but it's very different from the other lines. It has a note of strength and power and also, war.
Yes, it does. It does. It does. I think it's the power that it is warlike, but I think it also speaks in particular to power. And perhaps it speaks to the power of love. Who knows?
Okay.
Okay. So, Shir HaShirim is an equal opportunity poem. And so not only does the man describe the woman, but the woman also describes the man. So Eden, can you help me out? I don't have pictures of people, so I don't know who would like to read. How about Peter? Peter?
Fine.
Okay,
Diane.
great. Okay, here you go.
His hands are rods of gold, studded with beryl. His belly a tablet of ivory, adorned with sapphires.
So beryl is a kind of gem. And again, this description of the man shows a great deal of power and raw materials that were quite important and rare, ivory and beryl and sapphires. So it speaks to the man's rare qualities of beauty. Okay. Who else? Rita.
Yes.
There you go.
His legs are like marble pillars set in sockets of fine gold. He is majestic as Lebanon, stately as the cedars.
Okay, so here we have rare materials. We have comparing marble pillars. So there's sort of a physical comparison between legs and pillars, which you can kind of see. And again, we have a geographic reference to Lebanon, and Lebanon is particularly known in the Bible for its stately cedars. Mother, Roz Davidson, go ahead.
I'm here.
Go ahead. Can you see it?
No, of course I'm. I'll read it. I'll read it from here. His mouth is delicious, and all of him is delightful. Such is my beloved. Such is my darling, O maidens of Jerusalem.
Okay, so in the poem, we often see the woman talking to other maidens of Jerusalem and speaking so highly of her love. It's quite an exciting little poem. Okay, a very important theme in this poem is the garden. Let's see, who else is on? Judy? Aegis?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. A garden locked is my own, my bride, a fountain locked, a sealed up spring.
Okay, go on.
Awake, O north wind, come, O south wind, blow upon my garden, that its perfume may spread. Let my beloved come to his garden. Whoa.
Yeah.
Want me to go on?
That's lovely.
You finish it up, Judy.
Yeah, sure. I have come to my garden, my own, my bride. I have plucked my myrrh and since eaten my honey and honeycomb. Woo. Drunk my wine and my milk. Eat. Is there more to this? Wait.
Wow, wow, wow.
Is that it? I can't see.
Eat lovers and drink deep of love.
Ah.
So the garden is prominent theme in the poem. The garden represents the woman's sexuality, surprise, surprise. And as you can see in verse 4, the woman's sexuality is inaccessible. But in verse 16, which is the second verse here, she has invited her lover to enjoy her garden.
Wow.
Yeah, and you just thought this was like nothing stuff here.
Right.
All right. The poem is filled with expressions of human desire, and I'll help you out here. And this brings us back to I am my beloveds. In the first verse, we looked at Dodi Li, which was my beloved is mine and I am his. But this is a little bit different. I am my beloved. She's giving herself over to her beloved, and his desire is for me. Come, my beloved, let us go into the open. Let us lodge among the henna shrubs. Let us go early into the vineyards. Let us see if the vine has flowered, if its blossoms have opened, if the pomegranates are in bloom. There I will give my love to you.
Okay. Okay. Bye.
Mom, just hold for 1 second. Are you going to continue to ask people to read, or?
No.
All right, so just stand by. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Clearly, the language captures the imagination and takes us to a different place in time. And it certainly captured the imagination of Marc Chagall, who did a number of paintings, number of works related to Shir HaShirim. And this one, clearly, we see the woman reclining in the garden. Okay, sexual language in the Tanakh in general. What I want to bring to you here is some scholarship from a very famous biblical and ancient Near Eastern scholar, Tikva Frymer-Kensky, who unfortunately passed away prematurely. I know the rabbi uses her books when he's teaching about women. And this is a book that she wrote that's called In the Wake of the Goddess. And what she writes about in The Wake of the Goddess is the transformation, the transition from ancient Near Eastern goddess-based religion to the monotheism that is the foundation of the Hebrew Bible. Frymer-Kensky argues that the ancient Near Eastern religions, the goddess and sexual activity related to the goddess was part of the natural order and related to fertility. The myths of ancient Sumer, for instance, that describe the goddess Inanna, also known as Ishtar, are filled with explicit references. And some of them are so explicit that I decided not to include them. But they are quite explicit. And in ancient Near Eastern times, there was also oftentimes a ceremony where every year when there was a concern that the harvest might not grow, but at harvest time, there would be a marriage between the king and a Vestal Virgin who represented the goddess. And that is a known custom that happened in ancient Near Eastern times. Tikva Frymer-Kensky compares this ancient Near Eastern rites to the Hebrew Bible, in which sexuality is basically completely sociological human phenomenon. Israel discusses sexuality in the language of the law. An extreme example, which you may or may not know, is the Sota ritual in the Bible, which describes an ordeal to which a suspected adulteress might be submitted for the purpose and by a jealous husband. If she survived this ordeal, then she was deemed not guilty. The purpose for the ordeal, the purpose for sexual laws in the Bible is apparently to maintain social order and to prevent the disturbance of social relationships. That has nothing to do with human and divine sexual relationships. So, as Tikva Frymer-Kensky says, the transformation in thought brought by biblical monotheism did not address sexuality, obviously because it's a monotheistic religion, so we weren't going to have the pagan kinds of rituals that came in ancient Near Eastern religions. The Bible focuses on sexual behavior as a form of social behavior, but never incorporates the sexuality into its vision of humanity or its relationship with the divine. So that's not to say that there aren't examples of, human love in the Tanakh, both licit and illicit. One that we probably all know is Isaac and Rebecca. They were very much in love, but what you might not know about Isaac and Rebecca is that when they were traveling, when there was a famine in the land of Israel and they needed to travel to find food, they said they went to Gerar. And the king of Gerar and the men of Gerar found Rebecca beautiful. And they obviously had designs on her. But the king of Gerar was looking out of his window one day, and he looked down, and there he saw, and literally the Bible says this, that Isaac was fondling his wife. And so the king of Gerar gets very angry with Isaac, and he says to him, you know, she's clearly not your sister. She's clearly your wife. And what if you lied to us? And what if we had tried to have relations with her? That would have disturbed your God, and we would have been in a great deal of trouble. Probably one of the best examples of romantic love in the Bible is Jacob and Rachel. This is illicit love. Jacob and Rachel. Jacob being willing to toil 14 years to be with his beloved Rachel. Then we have some examples of illicit love. Probably the most famous being David and Bathsheba. David being attracted to the beautiful Bathsheba, and even as a consequence, ensuring that her husband dies on the battlefield. Another example of illicit love in the Bible, which is between people in the Bible, is the story of Tamar and Amnon. Amnon was a son of David, and he took a fancy to his sister Tamar and raped her. So we do have examples of human love and sexuality in the Bible, some of them pleasant and a number of them unpleasant. Okay, then later in the prophetic material, we see Israel as God's wife. And the prophets, for example, Hosea, Amos, and Ezekiel, describe the relationship between Israel and God as a marriage. But Israel is often the wanton harlot, and God is the cuckolded husband. But God offers to take Israel back if she repents and changes her ways. The language in these texts is misogynistic, and it's pretty ugly. And particularly in Ezekiel chapter 16, where the language is in fact so ugly and so misogynistic that the rabbis decided that that portion, that chapter, could never be read as a Haftorah and could never be read in a public reading. So I will leave you to look at it if you care to. It's Ezekiel chapter 16. Read it at your peril. Okay, so now we come to our questions. Why is this book included in the Tanakh? According to Rabbi Akiva, according to the tradition, Rabbi Akiva strongly defended the inclusion of Shir HaShirim in the biblical canon. That is the Tanakh. The Mishnah quotes him as saying something like this: "For all the world is not as worthy as the day on which the Song of Songs was given to Israel. For all the writings are holy, but the Song of Songs is the Holy of Holies." So one thing we might want to know about Rabbi Akiva was that he had a very special marriage. He was married to the daughter of a very wealthy person, but her father was not happy with him because he was a scholar and went away to study, and so he disowned his wife, Rachel. But with his blessing, he went to study, and he actually went to study twice. And then he set up a Torah Academy, and he finally came back after 24 years with apparently 24,000 disciples. When Rachel came out to him in her ragged clothing to greet him, his disciples tried to push her aside. And Akiva told them, "Leave her. What is mine is mine, and what is yours is hers." Upon seeing his son-in-law's Torah scholarship, Rachel's father, reconciled with him and with his daughter and gave him half his wealth. Later, Akiva had a special golden diadem fashioned for Rachel, depicting the city of Jerusalem. So we certainly can gather from a little bit that we know from the stories about Akiva that he did believe in the love of a good woman and even romance and the important and fine things and the importance of fine things. So perhaps when he read the Shir HaShirim, he had sort of a personal relationship with it. In addition, he purportedly said, "He who sings the Song of Songs in wine taverns, treating it as if it were a vulgar song, forfeits his share in the world to come." So clearly for Akiva, the Song of Songs was a holy book and not one to be taken lightly. So why is this book included in the Tanakh? We just talked about that, but let's look at some other factors. It might be that it introduces into the biblical canon an important aspect of everyday life, which is romantic and sexual love. So for instance, the book of Ecclesiastes would not necessarily be one that, which is a very philosophical book, would not necessarily be one that would necessarily be considered necessary or appropriate to the Tanakh, but it expresses people's philosophical nature. Similarly, the Bible might be considered incomplete if it didn't include some reference to romantic and sexual love. So that's one reason why it might be in the Tanakh. Another reason why it might be the Tanakh is the rabbis argued that perhaps it is an allegory of the love affair between Israel and God. And that may be the rationale that they used to include it in the Tanakh. Decide for yourself whether it's an allegory or whether it's an actual expression of romantic love, or perhaps a combination of the two. Why is this book read on Passover? Okay, each of our three major holidays have both an agricultural and a historical connection. For example, so the three holidays are Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot. And of course, the agricultural connection with Passover is that it is the beginning of the wheat harvest and the beginning of the harvest season and the beginning of the spring, Chag HaAviv. So of course, as we've read in the Song of Songs is very interested in nature and the weather and also the harvest and fecundity, both with humans and with the land. Then there's the historical connection. The historical connection for Pesach is that it commemorates the Exodus from Egypt. And in the Exodus from Egypt, okay, God was immanent among the people. Immanent means that God was actually in the presence of the people. So we know from Exodus that the Lord went before the people in a pillar of cloud by day to guide them along the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them the light that they may travel day and night. This concept of immanence is very profound in Exodus. And in fact, when Moses used to go to the tent of meeting, what he was doing was meeting with God, the presence of God. In later books in the Bible, God is no longer immanent. He becomes transcendent, which means he no longer is actually within the people, but is above the people and watches the people from above. So arguably, this desire for immanence, this desire for a physical relationship with God may be one of the reasons that this Song of Songs, which speaks to the beauty of physical relationship and the beauty of two people who are imminent for each other, may be one of the reasons that this book may be read on Passover. Tikva Frymer-Kensky notes that the one exception to the extensive presentations of sexuality in the Bible, I mean, the absence of presentations of sexuality in the Bible, is the inclusion of Shir HaShirim, which she says presents an idyll of romantic love unconstrained by societal considerations, which recognizes the great force of love. The poetry says, for love is fierce as death, passion is mighty as Sheol. It darts of fire, a blazing flame. Vast floods cannot quench love. No rivers can drown it. The power of love expressed in Shir HaShirim is intense.